On this week's Pep Talk, I thought I would talk about something that is creating a little buzz in our community lately, and that is podcast pitching. And is podcast overused, right? Or is podcasting overused? And I know I talked about it a little bit a couple weeks ago, but more importantly, when you're pitching yourselves to be on podcast, how can you actually stand out? So I thought it would be fun to pull out one of our most talked about questions in our community onto the podcast. And today I'll share some insights on what you could do to stand out, really drawing from my own personal experience of talking on a lot of podcasts. I think we're up to like 720 or something crazy now, in addition to all the interviews that we do on our show. So there's a lot of interviewing and podcasting and all the things happening over here. But first, let's just talk about like the elephant in the room. And that is, how do you feel about podcast pitching? Are you overcomplicating it? My guess is probably yes. Do you get nervous to do it? The answer should definitely be yes, because I still get nervous doing it sometimes. And then do you just skip it, right? So when we start to get stressed out about things, like we're like, oh, we'll just do it later, we'll pause it. But podcast guesting, whether or not you have a podcast or not, is a really amazing growth strategy. And so I just thought I would share, like, hey, let's talk about how to make it easy, right? So even with the rise of podcasts, there's a lot of podcasts out there. Like, it is no secret that having a really great episode go live can not only boost your visibility, but it can create credibility as an entrepreneur. So as the competition grows, the question I get is podcast pitching becoming overused? My short answer is it is competitive out there, right? So there are a lot of podcasts and there are a lot of pitches, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible to stand out. So in fact, I would say, well, let's get creative, right? We talk about it all the time. Let's do something different. Let's get strategic with your approach. So here's what I would do to stand out, to use podcast pitching as a growth tool, as a networking tool, as a strategic tool to just get your visibility increase. But also, it's just really fun to talk to other people and to talk about your business. I mean, I think that's why a lot of you started in the first place. So number one is don't just pitch to pitch. So this is not a numbers game. You know, I've shared a couple of times that my goal was to pitch so many podcasts a week. I do have numbers goals, but I'm not just sending an email to send an email. Kind of like we say, don't just post to post. So we want to pitch podcasts that are going to help support you, but more importantly, support the host. So the pitching has nothing to do with you. We're not just crossing it off to get it off our list. We're strategically thinking, how can we help this host? How can we help get this host a win? It's a very different way of thinking about it. So don't just send out generic pitches to everyone under the sun. Like, take time to listen to the episode, understand the host style and audience, and tailor your pitch accordingly. Be a real human. Personalization goes a really long way. It can help you stand out from the crowd. I do talk about pitching inside our club and inside Anti-Social School and what to say and how to say it, but at a really high level, like, be a real human and do your research. Step two is pitching doesn't have to be formal. So yes, there's a formal way that you can do it, and we do that sometimes, but other times it could literally be a DM, a voice message, a let's get to know a person. And honestly, right now, this is what I am seeing work faster. It doesn't mean that the formal email connection piece, have an ask, doesn't work. But what if you just started a relationship? So as an example, this is like a real life example. I love watching this influencer on social because she travels everywhere. She's living overseas right now with her family. She teaches passive income. She has a podcast. And I was like, oh, I would be a great guest on her show, right? But then I'm like, Holly, follow your rules. How can you help her, right? Like, I want to be of service to her because I like her content and I like what she's doing. So instead of sending a formal pitch, I was like, I'm just going to put her on my list of people that I would like to get to know better. This is literally what I tell myself. And so honestly, I just got to know her over social and in DMs. We had some mutual friends and we started chatting. I was nervous to pitch her. I still didn't do it yet. And then I was like, well, give it a week. I'm going to let the relationship play out a little bit. And then I did eventually ask her, but it was an easy ask because over a period of a couple months, we have gotten to know each other. Now, I'm not advocating that you need to do that for everybody, but I think there's some instances where building a relationship first and then really truly figuring out how you can help someone and then also sending the emails, there's a nice little balance, right? Like, you can do both. So could I have sent a cold pitch in this scenario and gotten the same result? Probably. But would it have taken longer? Maybe. This way, I was making it a little bit more personal. And I think in the age of email, speaking from a podcast host, we get a lot. We get a lot of emails. So to make it easy, like this introduction was just an easy conversation and it just sort of flowed. And then we sent an email to confirm the show. So a bonus tip here is to lead with value, right? Your pitch is about them, not you, how you can help them. It's not about, I want to be a guest on your show. So when crafting your pitch, you really want to focus on like your unique insights behind the scenes, how you can help their audience, like literally spell out how you can help their audience. Say that. I can help your audience by showing this. I've experienced this similar to you by doing this. So show them why you are the perfect guest. But I think it's also, you can highlight your credibility. And this probably goes back to email. If you're inviting somebody to be on a podcast or pitching them over email, your credibility is really, really important. So you can share relevant achievements, other podcasts that you've been on. And this just sort of helps build trust. If I can see that somebody has been on a podcast that's like similar to mine, or I can see like what some of their topics are, it just really helps with the relationship. And then, it doesn't even have to be a pitch for a podcast episode. It could be like, hey, I would love to help your audience. Would any of these topics help them? So it's just really thinking about pitching a little bit differently. And then number 3, like get to know the network. So I would argue that the podcast hosting network is super, super valuable. As a host, I interview someone who's really amazing, who shows up prepared, which you should, who knows the show, which you should do your research, and I genuinely have a good experience. I'm going to share you over and over and over again because you made my life easier, right? So one key strategy that has worked wonders for us when it comes to booking more episodes was just build relationships with the podcast hosts that you're talking on, right? It's a transactional exchange, but if you take time to get to know them, they're going to refer you, you're going to refer them, and then it becomes this nice little cool, long-lasting partnership and collaboration. But then you can leverage that network. So if you have a really amazing interview with somebody, you could just reach out to them and be like, hey, I really loved being on your show. Do you happen to know anyone else that would appreciate this information or who I can help? Like, it sounds so much different than like pitching, like, is there any other podcasts I could be on, right? Like, it's just a different approach. And then last but not least, I always say, be human. We were just talking about this on a podcast interview. Like, you could literally say, I'm a real human. Remember that just because it's a good time for you to be pitching and sharing doesn't always mean it's a good time for the person you're pitching. So it's okay if you don't hear a response to check in, to follow up, to have a few conversations. That's really, really normal. And if you don't hear back after the initial pitch, again, it's really, really normal. And you can follow up and you can just give them a gentle nudge and be like, hey, I'd really love to help you. Do you think this is a good fit? Or let's chat about how we can collaborate. It's very different than just like forcing yourself onto their show. And behind the scenes, I'll share, we have, I don't even know, like 100 podcast applicants in this year alone. And I try really hard to make a point to respond to every single person because I hate when I don't get responded to, but it just takes time. And so in the long run, remember that it's the relationships that make the difference, right? You could pitch yourself to a podcast and maybe the timing is off, but maybe the relationship turns into a better collaboration. Like, you have no idea. The whole purpose is that we're putting ourselves out there. We're not afraid to tell the story, and we're building your network so that when people are ready, they're going to think of you because you're being really, really consistent with it. So while podcasting may be competitive, podcast pitching, getting yourself on pitches, I think that is very underused because most people will not follow through. They will not be creative. They will not follow a strategy that's a little bit different, and they won't be consistent. So if you're listening to this, just think about how you can be creative and how the focus of pitching can be more about relationships. Then you can layer in doing your research, leading with value, showing your credibility, but build genuine relationships to leverage your network, and the rest will come. I promise you, the rest will come. And in 4 years, I will tell you, this is like one of our number one strategies that has paid off. It is not a quick fix, but it will totally move mountains for you. And these relationships that you're going to form from being consistent with this strategy will change your life. So I hope this makes you excited about podcast pitches. If you have any questions, feel free to DM me, and I will see you next week.